Today's devotions again come from 1 Samuel, this time chapter 17, verses 48 through 51, and this is how they read. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. This young man, David, does for Israel what King Saul was afraid to do: face the enemy. David, if you'll read earlier in this chapter, is offended by the slander of Goliath towards God, the living God of Israel, in whom David trusted, and who had given David deliverance from both bear and lion when David was protecting his sheep. Now, the description of David in Hebrew is that of a young man who is not yet 20, but he has a heart that is devoted to God and takes offense at this Philistine who taunts the men of God. And we're told David runs. He runs to the battle. He runs toward the danger, and he does so confident in the Lord God. He does for the Hebrew army what Jesus has done for us and for the world. Jesus has run toward the danger and put himself in harm's way for us. As David trusted in God and acted, so also has Jesus. Jesus trusted his Father, the maker of heaven and earth, and he took on the enemy of God and his people, death, sin, and the devil. And like David, Jesus prevailed over that enemy. Remember, when man sinned in Genesis, Eve was promised a redeemer, one of her offspring who would defeat Satan. And God said to the serpent how this would take place. Verse 15 of Genesis 3 says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. That enmity, that hostility between the people of God and the devil is what we see on display between Goliath and his taunting of God's chosen, Israel. And as we've noted, David is indignant at this and runs to defeat this enemy of God. And how does he do that? With his sling and a stone. And where does that stone land that David slings at Goliath? Right in the head of that enemy of God. And from there, his head is indeed bruised. It's crushed and separated from his body by God's champion. And so, in what we see David do, we get a foreshadowing of the ultimate victory of Jesus over Satan. Yes, Satan bruises the heel of Jesus on the cross, but that same heel, like David did in standing over his vanquished foe, that heel has defeated Satan for us, and in so doing, Jesus has redeemed all of creation. What a picture David gives us of Jesus, God's ultimate champion. His victory is yours by grace through faith in him alone. Goodbye.